400 people stood up in that church expecting to watch me get married, and instead they watched me read my own mother handwriting out loud until she could not look at me anymore. That is where this story ends. It starts 12 hours earlier in a dark parking lot, with a journal I was never supposed to find. My name is Emily Carter, and at 11:47 that night, I sat alone in my mother car reading her private thoughts about the man I was set to marry the next afternoon. My mother, Linda, had spent 8 months inserting herself into every part of my wedding, every dress fitting, every cake tasting, every single vendor meeting, and I had thanked her for it, called her devoted, told my friends how lucky I was to have a mother so involved. Reading that journal, I understood exactly what devotion had actually meant. The first entry was dated back in March, my mother describing a kiss from my fiancé, Daniel, and writing that he made her feel alive again in ways she had not felt since my father left years earlier. By April, she was writing about afternoons Daniel spent at her house while I was at work, about how he told her what they had was real, not the comfortable relationship he settled for with me. She was not confused. She was not swept away. Every entry showed a woman who understood exactly what she was doing and chose, again and again, to keep doing it anyway, right up until the entry written the night before, describing one last night together while I sat across town celebrating what I believed was my final night as a single woman. My phone buzzed while I read that last page. A text from Daniel telling me he could not wait to marry me tomorrow. I did not cry. I did not call anyone screaming. I drove back to the hotel, sat on my bed until the sky turned gray outside the window, and by sunrise I had a plan more precise than anything either of them had ever given me credit for. I printed every page in the empty hotel lobby, folded the copies small enough to hide inside the stems of my wedding bouquet, and put my public face back on before my bridesmaids even woke up. My mother called that morning asking where her car was, her voice bright and untroubled, and I told her I was fine, just excited, hating how easily the lies slid out of me. She arrived at the church glowing in navy blue, called me the most beautiful bride she had ever seen, and fastened my late grandmother wedding bracelet around my wrist without a single tremor in her hands, a family heirloom worn by every faithful wife before me, handed to me now by a woman who had spent months proving she was anything but. Daniel called too, telling me trust and honesty were the most important things in a marriage, and I agreed with him completely, watching my maid of honor, Sophie, frown slightly at how serious we suddenly sounded. By 1:45, 400 guests rose to their feet as the wedding march began. My mother walked me down the aisle since my own father had left years earlier, and I nearly laughed at the cruelty of that symmetry, one broken promise handing me off toward another. Daniel waited at the altar, looking nervous and handsome, and when the minister reached the line asking if anyone had a reason these two should not be joined, the church fell into its usual formal silence, the pause nobody ever actually answers. I cleared my throat. 400 faces turned toward me as I said I had something to say. I thanked everyone for coming to witness what they believed was a celebration of love, then told them that the night before, I had found a journal detailing a months-long affair between the two people I trusted most in this world. My mother stood up from the front row demanding to know what I was talking about, and when I told her to sit down and called her mother in a voice colder than I had ever used with her, the entire church seemed to inhale at once. I pulled the folded pages from my bouquet and began reading, one dated entry after another. Her own words describing exactly how she felt kissing my fiancé while I was in the next room. Exactly how little guilt slowed her down. Gasps rippled through every row. Daniel lunged forward, trying to grab the pages, insisting I was having some kind of breakdown. That none of it was real, but I kept my voice steady and kept reading. And it was my mother who broke first, standing again, mascara streaking down her face, shouting that Daniel had told her it was real love, that he had promised to leave me for her. Daniel spun on her, calling it a mistake that meant nothing. And watching the two of them turn on each other in front of everyone we both knew was the moment the entire church stopped whispering and started staring in open horror. Somewhere in the third row, my sister Megan stood up and started clapping alone, slow and deliberate, until two of my coworkers rose and joined her, and then a dozen more, not celebrating a wedding, but applauding the one person in that building who had finally told the truth. I did not raise my voice again. I did not need to. I turned to my mother, who was reaching for my hand, and told her that a woman who helps plan her daughter's wedding while sleeping with the groom does not get to cry about being caught. I turned to Daniel and told him that trust, The very word he had used with me that morning was the one thing he never actually understood. Then I asked the minister to declare the ceremony concluded, set my bouquet down on the altar rail, and walked back down the aisle a second time that day. Past 400 people who would talk about this wedding for years, no longer a bride. Simply a woman who had finally stopped protecting people who never once protected her. I left town within the month, transferring to my company office in Portland with nothing but what fit in my car. My mother and Daniel both tried calling for weeks, and I let every single one go to voicemail before blocking their numbers entirely, learning slowly that forgiveness was never a requirement for healing. Portland gave me distance, a small, bright apartment, and a quiet kind of peace I had not felt in years. I noticed the man in the apartment above mine long before I ever spoke to him, mostly through footsteps overhead, and the smell of fresh bread drifting down the stairwell some evenings. We crossed paths properly for the first time at the coffee shop on the corner, both reaching for the last blueberry muffin, and he laughed and told me to take it, that he could survive on coffee alone for one morning. His name was Ryan Bennett, a graphic designer who worked from home, and for weeks we were nothing more than familiar faces. A nod in the hallway, a held elevator door, small comments about the rain that Portland never seemed to run out of. He never once asked about my past, never pushed for details I was not ready to give. And it was that patience, more than anything else, that eventually made me trust him enough to sit with him on the building rooftop one evening and tell him a small piece of why I had moved here alone. He listened without trying to fix it, told me simply that I deserved better than carrying other people's mistakes on my shoulders. And it was such an ordinary thing to say that it hit me harder than anything anyone had said to me in over a year. Months later, my mother called from a blocked number, her voice smaller than I remembered, telling me that she and Daniel had tried to build something together after the wedding and could not survive a single conversation without blaming each other for what they had done. I felt nothing hearing it, no satisfaction and no sadness, only the quiet confirmation that I had already moved on completely. Word eventually reached me that Daniel had lost most of his old friend group once the story spread, that people who once respected him now crossed the street to avoid an awkward conversation, and even that news landed somewhere far away, like it belonged to someone else's life entirely. A year after that church, Ryan asked me on our building rooftop with the mountains visible in the distance, if I would let him build something real with me. No rush, no pressure whenever I was ready. I was already ready. 2 years after the wedding that fell apart in front of 400 witnesses, I stood in a simple cream dress with wildflowers woven through my hair instead of a cathedral veil, in front of 12 people who had only ever known the woman I became after that day. My mother was not there. Neither was anyone from my old life. When Ryan and I said our vows beneath a rose-covered arch, I finally understood the difference between the wedding I once wanted and the marriage I actually needed. People still ask me sometimes if I regret standing up in that church instead of quietly walking away after the ceremony. I tell them the same thing every time. Silence would have protected them. Speaking protected me. And if there is one thing I know for certain now, it is that the people who taught you to stay quiet are never the ones who deserve your silence. If this story kept you here until the very last word, thank you for staying with me. And if you want more stories about betrayal, justice, and the courage it takes to finally speak the truth out loud, subscribe to the Revenge Tales because next week brings a story you will not want to miss.